Welcome to the JVS show. I'm Jonathan Vernon-Smith. Coming up today on the Big Phone In, do you think there's any need for Ukip to exist now? Under the leadership of Nigel Farage, Ukip made the journey from a fringe protest group to a national party with millions of supporters. Their message was that Britain needed a referendum on the EU and that we must vote to leave to secure a better, independent future for Britain. Well, we voted and we left. Nigel Farage stood down and now the party needs a new leader. Today is day one of the leadership battle, but what are the candidates actually fighting for now the party has achieved its goal? Fascinated to hear your thoughts on this morning. Do you think there is any need for Ukip to exist now? Good morning, welcome to the JVS show. I'm Jonathan Vernon-Smith. Coming up today, as a Labour MP says we need to teach male refugees how to treat women to avoid sex attacks like we saw in Germany, we'll speak to a JVS show listener who divides his time between Germany and the three counties. Plus, the plastic bag tax has reduced the number of bags being used by millions. So, should we go the whole hog and ban them altogether? I'll take your calls on that a little later, but first, on today's Big Phone In, I'm asking, do you think there's any need for Ukip to exist now?
My aim in being in politics was to get Britain out of the European Union. That is what we voted for in that referendum 2 weeks ago. And that is why I now feel that I've done my bit, that I couldn't possibly achieve more than we managed to get in that referendum. And so I feel it's right that I should now stand aside as leader of UKIP.
Nigel Farage there, resigning as the leader of UKIP. Well, under his leadership, UKIP made the journey from a fringe protest group to a national party with millions of supporters. Their message was that Britain needed a referendum on the EU and that we must vote to leave to secure a better, independent future for Britain. Well, we voted and we left. Nigel Farage stood down and now the party needs a new leader. Lisa Duffy is a UKIP town councillor. She's told the BBC Nigel Farage has done a great job and now she'll run as leader to take UKIP into government.
Not at anti-Farage. Nigel's done an amazing job and nobody can fill Nigel's shoes. Nigel's shoes marched the People's Army out of the European Union, and I think the next leader's shoes are a new pair of shoes, a new style that'll walk us into Westminster.
Yeah. So, Lisa Duffy thinks UKIP can get into government, and that will be the message in her leadership campaign. But do you think they can take that next step into government? Or do you think that now we've voted to leave the EU, there aren't actually any real battles left for UKIP to fight? The leadership contest really begins today, so I'm very keen to hear what you think on this. Do you think there is any need for UKIP to exist now? Stuart Agnew is UKIP MEP for the East of England. Good morning to you, Stuart.
Good morning.
Do you think there's any need for UKIP to exist now?
Oh, definitely. We're only halfway, actually, to completing the job. There were 4 phases we had to complete. The first was actually getting a referendum. The second was winning the referendum. The third is making sure that we do trigger Article 50, and the fourth is to actually leave. So we're halfway. I think the second half will be a bit quicker than the first half, which has taken over 20 years. But if we were to just vanish now, then everything could just flop back and the referendum would be forgotten, etc. So we are there to make sure that things do really happen.
But everyone knows that's not going to happen. Everyone knows. The Prime Minister has said herself, Brexit means Brexit. There's no way she's going to go back on that. It's very clear we are going to leave the EU. Everybody knows that. Everybody accepts that. There's nothing really that you as a party can now do to either speed that up or have any influence really on that. The fact is you've convinced people or played a part in convincing people to vote for us to leave the EU. That's your job done, isn't it?
Well, politicians don't always do what they say they're going to do. And if there's a feeling that UKIP's vanished and therefore there isn't the pressure, we could find that Brexit means a very diluted form of Brexit, which is not what we voted for at all. So it's essential we are there over the next 2 or 3 years there are two parts to this, but our first aim is to make sure we actually do leave the European Union. We've had a referendum, but no political act has actually taken place, and it's important to realise that we're still in the European Union, subject to all its rules, we're still paying in contributions, so nothing has actually changed since the 23rd of June.
But aren't you just trying to keep a job for yourself for a couple more years? I mean, the fact is, by the next general election, if Theresa May waits until 2020 to hold another general election, if we have, by that point, left the European Union and we have carved out our own fresh deal, then you will become completely redundant, won't you, as a political party?
Now, that's the longer term. So we've dealt with the shorter term, making sure we exit. We have become aware over the last 5 years that there are increasing numbers of what we would call former Labour voters, old traditional Labour voters, who are voting UKIP in bigger and bigger numbers. And looking at the state of the Labour Party at the moment, there's a huge opportunity for us to become the official opposition. Our power base, if there ever was one, was more in the east of England here, but it's shifted. We've really got the amount of votes we're going to get here now, but in the north of England and the West Midlands, it's a very different situation altogether. And the Labour Party is collapsing, and those votes will go somewhere, and we want them to go in our direction, so we've got to make sure that our policies are suitable for them.
What are your policies?
Well, we want to make sure that there really is a proper control on immigration, because that's what people are so concerned about.
Everyone knows UKIP's policy on immigration. Everyone knows UKIP's policy on the EU. But what are your other policies?
This is what people are really concerned about, is immigration.
Yeah, we've dealt with that. We know what your policy is on immigration. But what about the National Health Service? What about education? What about taxation?
Right. First and foremost, though, is that people want jobs and they want somewhere to live, and that is what unlimited. Even when we're not in the EU, there's still been an awful lot of immigration from outside the EU. Other parties just haven't got a handle on it. We would do that. So your next question, education, we do want to see a return to grammar schools. That is the way you can get social mobility.
Do you think that will chime well with Labour supporters, traditional Labour supporters? Do they want grammar schools?
For those who want social mobility, who want to be able to get on, I would say the answer is yes.
That sounds like a Tory policy to me.
In saying they don't want it.
Grammar schools is a Tory policy.
It was.
Well, that's not going to convince somebody living in a Labour heartland to suddenly vote UKIP, is it? That you say, we want to bring back grammar schools.
Well, it'll be one of the things. It won't just be the sole. The important one is the immigration thing. That we will regain control of that. We genuinely want to do that, and they understand that. The next thing is, of course, by leaving the EU, we can stimulate the fishing industry. A lot of the people who voted for us were from redundant fishing ports around this country. You mentioned the National Health Service. By controlling immigration, we can at least get a handle on the number of people who are using it. You said things stem from this.
But Stuart, you said a couple of minutes ago you want to be the official opposition. I mean, you can't be an official opposition when all of your policies, you just keep coming back to immigration. It's going to start to wear thin.
Because it impacts on other things. That's the point. It impacts on other things. We would like to stimulate British industry.
We're aware of that, but you cannot blame absolutely everything in this country and everything that isn't perfect on immigration. It's going to start to wear thin. People will see through that.
Of course you can't. And if people agree with the line you're taking, then they just won't vote for us. So it is as simple as that.
But how can you possibly say that you can be the official opposition to the government when all of your policies really, if push comes to shove, are about foreigners or about immigrants?
Because that is the leverage for so many other things.
So you do admit that is your main. You do admit that the large part of UKIP's philosophy is around foreigners coming to the UK.
It's around us not being able to have full control of our country because of all the immigration.
No, but as we've already discussed, by the next general election, that should have all been dealt with.
Well, we wonder. Let's hope so. Let's hope you're right. I mean, as I said right at the beginning, there were two phases to this. And the first phase is to make sure we do leave. but it could well be that it's a fudge, that it's a semi-Brexit.
Okay. Well, let's not go over the EU and us leaving the EU again. Let's move on to some other UKIP policies then, because you say you want to win over those Labour supporters. I mean, some of my listeners are Labour supporters, so I'm interested to see what you can do today to sell UKIP to them. What about pensions? What would UKIP do on pensions? What's your philosophy on that?
We have to be realistic about it. We have to be. We have got to be able to get this country in a position where we are spending less than we're raising in tax so we can reduce our national debt. And everybody has to play their part in that. So,
Are you talking about
we keep handing the next generation a bigger and bigger problem. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm a baby boomer. I'm now drawing a state pension, and I can see the problems coming up. So this affects actually.
So
everybody.
you would envisage cutting pensions?
We would hope that we could stimulate the economy enough so that didn't happen. We are not going to cut pensions. That's not our policy. So I don't want those.
But potentially you could, based on what you were just saying. You want the country to live within its means. You're unlikely to be any more generous to pensioners.
We'll be as generous as we're able to be, but we have to live within our means. It's so important to be able to do that.
What about housing? What about social housing?
Next generation.
What about social housing? See if you
housing...
can answer social housing without mentioning immigrants once.
Well, you can't.
Oh.
You can't.
But would you build more?
Yes, of course, we have got to have a major house building programme because at the moment we are falling behind every single week, and more people in this country are finding it more and more difficult to get a house.
So how many will you build?
Well, enough that are needed. We have got. You won't do it
and
overnight.
Where will they be built?
Initially on brownfield sites. That's what we're aiming for. There are a lot of brownfield sites, and of course there are many plots of land where permission has been granted to build housing, and no houses have been built there. And that's something that has to be addressed.
But I thought an awful lot of brownfield sites have already been built on, and now it was really the only option in terms of building houses is going to be on greenbelt land.
Well, let's get the brown belt sorted first.
But we kind of have, haven't we? There's very little left. So would you accept
where
that we
you
need
are.
to build on greenbelt land?
In our housing policy, we identified an enormous area of brownfield sites. I can't tell you off the top of my head how much it was, but it was a very substantial area.
And who will pay for the new social housing?
Who will pay for it?
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, of course, if it's social housing, taxpayers pay for it.
So where will you raise the money from?
So we've got to stimulate our economy, so we're growing more, we're raising more in tax. You can't get something for nothing. You just can't. You can't do what the Greeks did and just keep borrowing money to pay public sector pensions.
Right, what about, now this is the big issue for many Labour voters. What about welfare?
Well, we in our last manifesto were quite adamant that we were going to support all the various welfare schemes there are. And again, I know you don't like it, but when we have people coming into this country who claim welfare, who've paid nothing into it, it means there's less for other people.
But are you not a bit worried that if you achieve your objective and if we reduce immigration massively, you won't be able to blame immigrants anymore for all of the various different ills that this country has? So what will you blame then?
Well, we haven't got to that point, have we?
well.
You're looking.
You have to bear in mind that many of these immigrants you keep talking about pay an awful lot of tax into our system. An awful lot of these immigrants that you demonise or seem to demonise.
I'm not demonising.
Well, you seem to be suggesting that they are at the core of many of this country's problems. Many of those immigrants are contributing an awful lot to this country, and without them, we would be much worse off.
And those are the ones that we want, without a shadow of a doubt. We need an Australian-style point system so that the people who come to this country to work have the skills that we need. We have to get that done.
So can you just explain to my listeners who are the immigrants that we don't want?
Well, immigrants who arrive here without a job, who then compete in the low-paid sector with other workers, those who come here with.
But if they've got a job, they're contributing. You just said that they were the ones that we want.
We've already got those skills. I said that we need people here whose skills we don't have. where we have a shortage of those skills.
Right, but many of those people that we need are low-skilled workers.
Well, I would have said that there are enough people in this country to do those jobs. That's my opinion.
But there aren't.
I would have said that at the moment...
Well, have you ever spoken to anyone who runs a restaurant? You speak to someone who runs a restaurant and say to them, if you were to get rid of every single migrant in this country, would they have enough people to peel their vegetables? Would they have enough people to wait on their tables?
Will you please... You did this to me before, when I last spoke to you.
I'm not going to have you demonising
I'm not
migrants
anybody.
who contribute an awful lot to this country.
Are you going to let me speak?
Yes.
Right. All of those who are working in this country at the moment will stay here. There isn't going to be a send them back. That's always been UKIP policy, and I see Mrs. May.
But if all of the issues like housing, like the NHS, like education, like welfare, if it's all broken at the moment because of the migrants we have, and if what you're saying is that all of the migrants here will get to stay, then how are you going to deal with it? Because all you've said is the problems are caused by immigration, so you would restrict immigration. They're already caused by immigration, according to you, so what are you going to do to fix them?
I've said that we are going to build more houses so that everyone who's living in this country can get a house, and we will restrict further immigration so that we only get those whose skills we need. We have to catch up. We have to catch up, not sending anybody back unless they commit a crime. I think that's very reasonable.
So how do we catch up?
By building houses.
Paid for by whom?
Well, obviously, those are going to live in them. You asked about social housing. Well, that has to be funded by the taxpayer.
You can't have it both ways. You can't say that we've got massive problems in this country with our housing caused by immigration, our NHS caused by immigration, our welfare system caused by immigration. So we're going to deal with immigration and then say, but we're not going to send any of these immigrants home, because you're not ultimately solving the problem. And what you've just blamed all of these problems on, you're not dealing with.
Well, I have just said that those immigrants who are here, and most of them are doing useful work. So they stay here contributing to the economy and paying tax. However, the fact that so many have arrived has put a major strain on our house building. So we have to catch up. We need to substantially reduce the immigration now in order to be able to do that. But, however, we want to grow our economy. To do that, we need to produce goods and sell them. To do that, we need skills. We may be short of some of those skills, and that's where new immigrants will play a part.
But if we go back to your core argument that you began all of this with, you said that you feel that UKIP now has the opportunity to become the official opposition to the government, and you want to win over Labour voters. And you said that a core principle will be your line on immigration. And yet you've also just said that all of these immigrants that are in the country that you feel are causing problems, you're not going to send them back.
No, we're definitely not going to. Definitely not.
So how are you going to win over those Labour voters?
By assuring them that we will not have immigration at the level that it has been, which is 300,000 net a year. It's an enormous number of people. We have got to get a handle on that. Everybody understands that. Then we can build houses faster than people arriving here, and we can take the strain out of that.
OK. Thank you very much indeed, Stuart. Good to talk to you.
Right. I thought there was somebody else coming on the line. That's it. OK.
Thank you. Yeah. Stuart Agnew is the UKIP MEP for the East of England. Yes, there is somebody else on the line. He's Godfrey Bloom, who's a libertarian. He was one of the founding members of UKIP. He even donated £250,000 of his own money to support the party when it first started. Good morning to you, Godfrey.
Good morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Godfrey, I'm a little confused because having just listened to Stuart, he seems to be of the opinion that UKIP can continue winning and can be an effective and constructive opposition to the government by just banging on about immigration forever. Is that true, or have they got to start getting some other policies, proper, well-thought-out policies?
Well, I'm a bit like the Irishman from Kerry. I wouldn't start from here, which is why I left UKIP a few years ago. I didn't see eye to eye with them on policy. I would support Stuart, who, of course, who I know extremely well, when he said we do need a policeman to make sure that Brexit means Brexit. And I'm not nearly as sanguine as you are, Jonathan, about the trustworthiness of our incumbent politicians. I think they can't help but cheat and lie. And I think there is a big place tactically for UKIP at the moment until we are absolutely clear of the EU. So I do agree completely with that. But when UKIP started, and it's actually in the Constitution, the UKIP constitution is that it is a libertarian party, or if you will, a classical liberal party. And I think there is a gap in politics if UKIP wants to be the main opposition party, the legitimate opposition party. The problem I think that UKIP has, and you heard it there, in spades, I think, was there is a movement now within UKIP to take it into a position which you might argue was centre-left. Now, the centre-left is an extremely crowded place. It's where the Conservative Party have positioned themselves. And I would say if UKIP want to just break out of this 13 or 14% in the polls, which they haven't broken out of for many years, they seem to be stymied. They seem to be not able to just break through and get seats in Westminster. And I believe that to do that, they need to become what it says in the Constitution, which is a classical Liberal party. And I think what most Labour voters, we were talking about Labour voters who listen to your programme in big numbers, I'm quite sure, and I live, as you know, in the north of England, and UKIP does very well getting their votes. But what most people want is most people in the pubs and clubs that you visit, Jonathan, want less government. We all think we have too much government. We think there's too much tax. We think our beer's too expensive. Our rates are too expensive, business rates, the tax on petrol. Now, the only way to deal with this and get the economy rolling is to roll back government. We have a situation now where over 50% of GDP is spent by government. So what needs to happen now, we need to be fairly ruthless. We have a welfare bill which is simply out of control. We have billions and billions of pounds being spent on the NHS with less than 50% of the 1 million workers in the NHS have any medical skill or medical qualifications whatsoever. So a lot of the money that we spend in taxation is wasted.
But Godfrey,
this is where UKIP should step forward. This is where UKIP could step up.
Yes, but I hear that, and you're absolutely right. That is maybe where UKIP should be positioning themselves. However, is there not a bit of an issue that, yes, of course, UKIP has done very well with a lot of Labour supporters across the country on one issue, on the issue of immigration. That's what has gone down very, very well. But actually, scratch beneath the surface, UKIP is not anything like the Labour Party. You, by your own admission, you've just admitted that UKIP at its core really is a party that wants a small government. It wants lower taxation. It wants a government that takes less money from people, which of course then in turn means there will be less money to spend on public services, on all those other things that traditionally Labour supporters are very keen on. So surely any Labour supporter, any true Labour supporter that thinks and investigates and use their mind, the minute they do scratch beneath the surface, they will realise that UKIP is not the party for them.
Well, you see, that's exactly the point I'm making. 3 years ago, the strategic opportunity was lost because sooner or later, as you quite rightly say, you couldn't rely on just immigration. Immigration, and it was Nigel Farage's Purple Army. And that's exactly what it's been. Now, that's all very well. We've had the referendum. The Outers have won, and all that's jolly good and wonderful. That's how UKIP started out. But what I tried to persuade UKIP to do 3 years ago was start looking further ahead strategically with a decent shadow cabinet, plausible, well-costed policies, so that they could offer something in the shop window more than just immigration. And you're quite right. At the moment, all they talk about is immigration, and they've got to widen that base. And they're not wrong. It is an important thing, and people on the doorstep are very concerned. But I think you'll find if you... I would argue, Jonathan, that you misread a lot of the Labour voters. I spend a lot of time on the stump. I represent Yorkshire, and I did for 10 years. You know, most people are not comfortable with the amount of public spending. I don't think your average Labour voter wants all this public spending. It certainly doesn't end up in his pocket. It seems to end up in fat cat bureaucrats chaps at the town hall owning salaries that you could only dream about, it doesn't seem to end up with the people who need all this welfare
Godfrey,
help.
let me ask you one very quick final question before I let you go. Do you think that being realistic about it, do you think that UKIP is now a dying party? And do you think by the next election, to be honest, their entire purpose will have just evaporated?
That will only be the case if they don't grip these problems now. But the answer I would suggest is no, it doesn't need to die at all. And if they get the right leadership, the right policies, and they get their act together, no, indeed, no, I don't accept that at all.
You haven't been tempted to chuck your hat into the ring and, bash a few more journalists over the head?
No, I think party politics isn't for me. But no, it doesn't need to run out of steam, UKIP. Believe me, it doesn't. But at the moment, they've got to get their act together, and they haven't so far.
Good to talk to you. Thank you, Godfrey. Godfrey Bloom is a libertarian. He was one of the founding members of UKIP. He even donated £250,000 of his own money to support the party. Well, do you think there is any need for UKIP to exist now? If so, what? Because even if you work on the basis that there's still a job to do to make sure that Brexit really does mean Brexit, if you take Theresa May at her word, then by the next general election we will have left the EU. So then there really is no need for them, is there? Do you think there is any need for UKIP to exist now? Under the leadership of Nigel Farage, UKIP made the journey from a fringe protest group to a national party with millions of supporters. Their message was that Britain needed a referendum on the EU and that we must vote to leave to secure a better independent future for this country. Well, we did vote, and we did leave. Nigel Farage stood down, and now the party needs a new leader. Today is day one of the leadership battle, but what are the candidates actually fighting for? Now the party's achieved its goal. My question to you today is, do you think there's any need for UKIP to exist now? As a Labour MP says we need to teach male refugees how to treat women to avoid sex attacks like we saw in Germany, we'll speak to a JVS show listener who divides his time between Germany and the three counties. We'll get his take on that. Plus, the plastic bag tax in supermarkets has reduced the number of bags being used by millions. Well, before 11 today, we'll hear from campaigners who think all shops should now have to charge for plastic bags, and I'll ask whether you agree with that. First, though, on today's Big Phone-In, we've been discussing UKIP. And my question to you is, do you think there's any need for UKIP to exist now? Under the leadership of Nigel Farage, UKIP made the journey from a fringe protest group to a national party with millions of supporters. Their message was that Britain needed a referendum on the EU and that we must vote to leave to secure a better, independent future for this country. Well, we did vote, and we did leave. Nigel Farage stood down, and now the party needs a new leader. Today is day one of the leadership battle. But what are the candidates actually fighting for now the party has achieved its goal? I'm fascinated to hear your thoughts on this, particularly if you are a UKIP supporter, if you're one of my listeners that have voted UKIP at recent past elections. Do you think there's any need for them to exist, or do you think they have just done the job and it's time to gracefully retire into the political ether? Interesting. Listening to Stuart Agnew, he was saying that he really feels that what UKIP can do now is to really focus on the Labour voters. They picked up an awful lot of Labour voters at the last couple of elections. My only issue with that is, OK, UKIP can go on and on and on about immigration, but if you scratch beneath the surface, once you've got past immigration, are the rest of UKIP's policies, the people that are members of UKIP, the people that support UKIP, are they really true Labour supporters? Do they have a socialist principle at heart? I would suggest they probably don't. I mean, as Godfrey Bloom said himself, most people in UKIP, they believe in small government, they believe in lower taxation, which of course, if you've got smaller government, if you've got less tax coming in, it means less money to spend on public services. And I don't know whether that's necessarily a very socialist principle. Matt texts to say, as a Labour supporter, I'd never vote UKIP. Let's hear from two JVS show listeners who disagree on whether we still need UKIP. Nick is in Hertfordshire. Good morning to you, Nick.
Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning. You don't think there's any need for UKIP now?
No, I certainly don't. And the idea that they class themselves as a kind of left-of-centre party, which Godfrey Bloom said, I mean, he fell off my seat. There's nothing left-wing about UKIP whatsoever. And whether it's relevant today, well, I think that sums it up by the fact that they're having so much trouble finding a leader. It's simply a one-issue party that was formed as a fringe group that's been given massive exposure by the media, regardless of what the likes of Farage says, simply because it concentrates on one populist issue of immigration and the EU. And that has actually found its base over a lot of Labour supporters who have been aggrieved by both Labour and Tory governments. And they feel that simply because a party speaks so much about immigration and that is the party to vote for. And I think the writing's on the wall. You ask, are they there? Should they continue? Well, I don't think even Nigel Farage wants it to continue. You'd think, after all this campaigning he's done to get the Brexit vote, he now does a runner. And why does he do a runner? He says it's to get his life back. On the contrary, it's because he doesn't want to now bear the consequences of what Brexit will mean.
Nick, stay there. Let me bring Alan in Potter's Bar in. Hello, Alan.
Good morning, Joe, yes.
Good morning. And Nick doesn't feel there's any need now for UKIP. They've done their job. Time to disappear. No purpose for them.
Far from it. As I said to Grace, Jeremy Corbyn's got the Labour Party in disarray. There is still a lot more work to be done on the Brexit side. Yes, there are still issues over immigration. And as for Nigel, well, I'm afraid the poor man, he's suffered quite a bit compared to most other politicians. You know, he's been in an air crash, his car crash, he's been attacked. You know, I know it's a job that you take on, but at the end of the day, he's going to go down in history, which Corbyn and Cameron won't ever do. In terms of if we actually eventually come out of Brussels or out of Europe, he will go down in history as a man that helped bring us down.
Alan, forget Nigel Farage. He's gone. That UKIP is now nothing to do with Nigel Farage.
Yes, but we now need to have, as you said, part of your entry into this is that UKIP was a party that's brought people together, under this premise of immigration and Brexit. I think there's going to be a lot more to come from that. There are people in the party, and hopefully more people would join, to help support and look at issues that face this country.
But but realistically, Alan, let's just be frank about this. Scratch beneath the surface of UKIP. What you've actually got is you've got the right wing of the Conservative Party.
Yes.
You haven't got Labour people. This is not a party that talk the kind of language that Labour supporters want to hear. You've got the right wing of the Conservative Party in there.
You have. Yes, I agree on that part. Yes, you have got the right wing of the Conservative Party. But at the same token, there are some people who felt that. They must have felt that there was a need to go this route because of the way they're being treated in their own country. Otherwise, you wouldn't have got Labour supporters voting UKIP.
Yes, but if you put the immigration, you see, this is what I was trying to do a little with Stuart Agnew. I was trying to get him to answer the question without mentioning immigration once, because by his own admission, he said that they wouldn't be doing anything about all these immigrants in the country that UKIP blame for everything. They're not going to do anything about those people. So you've then got to answer the question without mentioning immigration once, and they frankly can't.
No, I agree that they've got to now start putting the parties now, as you say, it's day one. They've got a new leadership. They've got to start looking at what their manifesto is going to put together for the future. We've got an election in 2020? Then they've got to try and work towards that and see what's happening with the country regarding Brexit and what's happening internally regarding business and finances, and see what policies they're going to come out with. It's all a new start. There's major changes taking place since we've voted to come out of Europe.
But if your core principle as a political movement is to get us to withdraw from the EU, once you've achieved that objective, then what else is there for you to do?
Well, you could say the same for the Liberal Party. What have they done?
But the Liberal Demo, it's a bit different, isn't it? Because the Liberal Democrats are made up of people that have very core principles at heart, and they all have very core kind of ideals as to what is important in the world. They believe, the Liberal Democrat Party, for example, believe in a pro-European approach. The Liberal Democrat Party believe in high taxation for rich people in order to particularly focus money on education. Those are some of the core principles for Liberal Democrat voters. And if people think like that, then they're likely to support the Liberal Democrats.
Well, you're going to get the same thing with UKIP now. You've got to think what's going to happen. We don't know what. What are the philosophies of UKIP apart from leaving the EU? EU and immigration, I agree, but this is where it now has got to change. And they've got to now look at other policies. They've made a start with getting the Brexit part, but we're not fully out of Europe yet, are we? That's still ongoing.
But surely, if you're someone, for example, that has voted UKIP in the past because you wanted us to leave the EU, and if we've now left the EU, or if we will have done by the next general election, then surely as a voter, you will then have to start looking at other issues. So you'll look to yourself and you'll think, well, okay, I'm a person that wants low taxation. I want more of my money, and I want to keep my own money, and I want to be the one to decide what my money is spent on. So I'm more likely to vote Conservative. I'm someone who actually believes that we should tax the rich more, and we should take the money from rich people, we should put it into the system, and we should then invest that money on more public services to provide things for people that can't afford it. I'm going to vote Labour. There's enough of a political spectrum already there, isn't there, without the need for UKIP?
Well, but you say that, but then UKIP has actually divided the parties, and I think there's those policies could be within UKIP's manifesto and cover both aspects, which will give what people are looking for and become another strong party, which is needed in this country. Because I think the way the Labour Party is going with Corbyn.
Nick, do you not recognise that actually if UKIP could get their act together by the next election, and if we ended up, for example, with a hung parliament, UKIP could become a bedfellow of the Conservative Party in a kind of coalition agreement?
Well, they are already. I've never ever believed that UKIP were really all that separate from the Conservative Party. They were formed out of the Conservative Party. They are businessmen, industrialists, Godfrey Bloom and the other one, Agnew. They're all staunch Conservatives. There's nothing said on your programme earlier today that would have been out of kilter with a Tory party manifesto. And to say that UKIP, what would they be like on policies? It's a myth. They don't want to have any other policies. Their whole identity has been based on Europe, banging against Europe and immigrants. If they try to form policies around the economy, the National Health Service, public services, defence policy and everything else, it'll be totally in kilter with what the Tory party say. So this is why it was a one-man party leader, and the idea your caller there says that he's been a much persecuted politician over the years is complete nonsense. He's had every positive exposure, and if he wanted his life back, I wonder what he was doing at Donald Trump's Republican convention last week. That doesn't sound like, to me, getting his life back.
Nick and Alan, thank you very much for your opposing views. Well, do you think there's any need for UKIP to exist now? Yes, talking UKIP this morning on the Big Phone, and I'm asking, do you think there's any need for UKIP to exist now? Of course, under Nigel Farage's leadership, UKIP made the journey from a fringe protest group to a national party with millions of supporters. Their message was very simple, that Britain needed to come out of the EU. Well, we as a country, we have now had this vote. We've voted to leave. We are coming out of the EU. So is there an argument that UKIP has really achieved their objective? There is now no purpose for them? Or do you think there are still things they can do? They've built up this loyal army of millions of supporters. They should do something with that. They need to come up with some new policies, but you absolutely believe they can do that. Ian Dunt is the editor of politics.co.uk. Ian, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Do you think there's any need for UKIP to exist now?
Well, I mean, I don't really feel there ever was a need for them to exist, and I find them quite poisonous in almost every way. But let's put that to one side and just imagine that, here is a party that was at least articulating something that was felt by some members of the public. And are they still going to be able to keep on doing that? And my guess is, on a sort of intellectual level, no, you're right. The core idea that they were trying to propose has now been accepted in a referendum. So what they will actually try to do is rebrand themselves. This applies to almost anyone who takes over as leader, as the real Brexit party. And there is almost nothing that Theresa May is going to be able to offer in terms of EU negotiations for our exit that will ever satisfy them, because it will not be in their interest, their political interest, to be satisfied. So even if she comes out with some proper year zero sort of raised earth, pretty sort of robust Brexit program, say well outside of the EEA or something like that, they will still say, well, you've betrayed the people, by not going far enough with Brexit, because that is the only way that they can continue to exist politically. So regardless of whether they're ever necessary, their only way forward now is to accuse Theresa May of betrayal, no matter what she does.
Right. So, do you think that's what they will do then as a party? They will just criticise every step of the Brexit plan and then present themselves at the next election as a party that would have gone even further?
Yeah, invariably, yeah, under almost any leader. So let's say, the temptation for Theresa May will be to try and find a way of staying in the single market. And that may be by making some sort of allowance on freedom of movement. But ultimately, any move that takes Britain out of the single market is judged to be economically catastrophic in the long term. For decades, for generations really, to this country, by almost any senior economist, it would be truly devastating stuff. And yet, it'll be UKIP and sort of about a third of the Tory parliamentary party, the sort of quite hard Eurosceptic right-wingers within the party, who will try and push her into that position. And any element of us staying in the single market would be a betrayal of Brexit. And that'll really be where the party's political mission comes up over the decades to come.
Do you think, apart from the EU referendum and the result of it and our eventual leaving of the European Union, do you think that UKIP will be able to carve out any kind of niche, political niche, to do with other issues?
Not really. It all tends to fall apart for them whenever they move off the subject of Europe or immigration. And actually, even on immigration, if you look at the way that Douglas Carswell, their only MP, talks, compared to the way that, their other, say, their MEPs talk, or certainly the way that Nigel Farage does, it's very, very, very different. Carswell isn't actually particularly anti-immigration at all. So really, once they start taking on any other subject, they find themselves in terrible trouble. And you see that, for instance, with their appeal to Labour voters in the Midlands and the North. When you really look at some of UKIP's policies and the way that UKIP's rank and file talk about issues like subsidies and trade barriers, they envisage an extremely free market country, more akin to Singapore than it would be, say, towards France or something. So actually, when it comes to the economics, most of the people they're trying to attract, sort of disillusioned Northern Labour voters, will be rather turned off by UKIP's policy platform as soon as they talk about anything other than immigration in the EU. And that makes it very, very difficult for them to flesh out an alternative position on issues unlike the ones that they usually talk about.
Are they conservatives in purple clothing?
Oh, absolutely. And almost every sort of leading UKIP person you meet, and that goes down to the local level, usually were former Tories who left, typically speaking, they left sort of around Maastricht time and were looking for an alternative. They were in for the EU. And that's pretty universal. There's some more recent changes to that. You get a few people from different political traditions. But in terms of the people that you meet, UKIP conferences or UKIP meetings, they're almost universally former Tories.
Good to talk to you, Ian. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ian Dunt is the editor of politics.co.uk. Barry in Hemel says, JVS, of course there is a need for UKIP, if only as the tool of the people. UKIP has shown its popularity and it has had its impact on politicians of all parties. We need a party of the people who are not afraid to speak out. They do put the British point of view to the front above all others. Brian says, of course we need UKIP. They're the only party that is for the English people. If there is no one speaking for us, the governments of the other parties will never do anything to change this dysfunctional country. So do we kind of accept that? Do we accept that ultimately UKIP is the party that is pro-English, anti-foreigner? Is that kind of what we can conclude from all of this? We can dress it up with this word immigration, but ultimately, if you're not that keen on foreign people, then you're going to like UKIP. And if so, is that a party that we want to continue in our British political sphere. Deb's in Royston. Good morning to you, Deborah.
Morning, Jonathan.
Good morning. What do you think? Is there any need for UKIP?
Oh, it's absolutely imperative that it stays in place for now. I don't think forever and a day, but certainly until we see that the will of the people has been actually agreed and kept to, because we're not anywhere near the start of the process. Article 50 has not yet been triggered off. We don't know when that's going to be triggered off. It appears to be months or even longer while they sort of think about how they're going to do that. They have obviously got a small negotiation team in place, but we haven't really got negotiators in the civil service in this country, because we have for donkey's years had all the negotiations with foreign countries done by Brussels. So, we are obviously getting offered help by places such as Australia and New Zealand, what have you, who have done
if you
that
believe,
in Canada.
if you believe that
we need it in place still, because, and the main reason is, somebody has got to hold the government to account to make sure that the will of the people is.
Yeah,
is
I
adhered to.
accept that. The point I was going to make to you is that if we work on the likely time frame, and a good way of working this out will, of course, be election time. That's normally a good way of seeing what a government is going to do. So they are suggesting that they're going to trigger Article 50 at the beginning of next year, 2017, which means that we will then leave in 2019. Then there's a general election the following year. The government will have to have shown the electorate that we have left the EU by the next election. So that's going to happen. Now, even if we were on the basis that there is a necessity for UKIP for the next 3 years to oversee the negotiations and to kind of be a general anti-EU voice in the UK, surely you will accept by the next election, when we have then left, there is no point to them.
Well, the dateline is very questionable, because I'm very wondering whether, in fact, Theresa May is going to do something she said she wasn't going to do, but actually will call an early election. If the Jeremy Corbyn vote goes as it seems to be predicted, that he's still going to be in the leadership, I think she could well take a run at it this autumn. Put up and say, look, because it's her best bet. She's got a Labour Party that's in complete disarray and will not be ready or prepared or have the money to actually run a good campaign. So her best bet is to go for an early election, which will then give her 5 years in government. It won't be the timeline that we've just been thinking about. It'll be something different. And therefore she may feel that she can dawdle a bit, though she doesn't appear at this moment to be a dawdler when you think what she's just done to the Chinese and the French. But, she may dawdle a bit on this, and I am still very concerned that although we've got sort of Liam Fox and David Davis and what have you, there is still a majority on that cabinet who actually were Remainers, including her, and certainly the civil servants would be Remainers, because it's been an easy life for them in many ways. They're now actually going to have to earn their money.
Okay, but even if we work on your worst case scenario, as far as you're concerned, being true, the fact is that the UK is going to withdraw from the EU. We all accept that. Of course it is, because otherwise there would be riots on the streets.
No. Is it going to be? Oh, they'll do it craftier than that. They won't just say, we're not doing it. But you've got the worst losers in the whole world, the people who voted to remain, who are absolutely vociferous and vile and horrible at the moment to anybody who had the temerity or stupidity to vote to leave. Those people are not, it appears, giving up. They have not gone back to bed. They are very much planning and plotting and doing all sorts of things. Now, one of the things that they're now saying is, well, we don't know what the negotiation will actually, in the end, be putting forward as our way forward. And it's only fair that the people of this country have a vote on that, that they actually see what is going to be agreed or put forward, and that they have the say, in the hope that they can once again rabble-rouse, say that we're all stupid, people who want to leave it, it's going to be a disaster, which it has not been a disaster. The world
well, we haven't left yet.
The sun has still risen.
You haven't got a clue. None of us have a clue. We haven't left yet.
No, but we were told by the doom leaders that the minute we left, everything was going.
We haven't left yet.
We
haven't left.
To do an emergency budget,
but we haven't left.
Sorry,
Deborah, we haven't left.
No, but we were told by the Remainers that the minute we said we had decided to leave, the world would collapse. Well, the world has not collapsed. Things have actually settled back quite a lot. There's still a lot of questions.
Deborah, I'm going to thank you very much for your. I'm going to thank you for your time. I just want to squeeze Pat in quickly before the news. Sorry, Pat, you've only got 30 seconds, but
I just wanted to say, yeah, I would still vote to leave. I was very disappointed that Nigel stepped down. I thought he could have held on a bit longer, maybe, to get things a bit moving a bit. But I agreed with Stuart in many respects. I do think that. I'm not going to say everything is due to immigration, but I do believe that immigration are holding us back in many respects regarding lots of things. I mean, I know we've got some super people over here that do really...
Yeah, what about all those immigrants paying your pension, Pat?
Pardon?
What about all those immigrants paying your pension?
Yeah, but some of them are not. Some of them are taken out of the pot.
Most of them are paying your pension.
Well, I don't think they all are paying my pension because a lot of them are taken out of the pot.
No, a lot of them are paying tax and a lot of them are paying your pension. But thank you for your call. A Labour MP has said that many refugee men come from countries where men and women are not treated as equals. And those who come to England may need lessons on how to treat women if we want to avoid the kind of sex attacks seen in Germany. Thangan Debonair, who chairs the all-party parliamentary group on refugees, said these lessons could be part of a national drive to improve male attitudes towards women. To quote Ms Debonair directly, new arrivals need a sensitive introduction to a different culture. And she says that we could give lessons to all boys, including those born here, so a generation of young men have a more forward-thinking attitude towards women. Well, in this hour, we're going to speak to JVS show listener Tom Wilson. Now, he divides his time between the three counties and Germany. He can give us first-hand experience of what it's been like for German people dealing with the huge influx of refugees, many of whom are young men from parts of the world where the culture and the attitudes towards women are different from Western Europe. We'll hear his story. And of course, I'd like to hear from you as well. Phone lines are open. Do you think it's acceptable to make refugee men attend lessons on how to treat women? I want to talk to you about the challenges, if any, posed to our Western liberal society by the influx of refugees from parts of the world where men and women are far from equal. Why are we discussing this? Well, I'll tell you why. This weekend, a Labour MP has said that many refugee men come from countries where men and women are not treated as equals, and those who come to England may need lessons on how to treat women if we want to avoid the kind of sex attacks seen in Germany. Thangan Debonair, who chairs the all-party parliamentary group on refugees, said these lessons could be part of a national drive to improve male attitudes towards women. To quote Ms Debonair directly, she said, "New arrivals need a sensitive introduction to a different culture." And she says we could give lessons to all boys, including those born here, so a generation of young men have a more forward-thinking attitude towards women. Well, in this hour, we're going to speak to JVS show listener Tom Wilson. He was born in Germany, and now he divides his time between the UK and the country of his birth. He's been going out to Germany regularly over the last 3 years, and he's noticed a lot of change since the migrant crisis. In fact, last week, he wrote me this email. Listen to this. JVS, I have a German partner and go over every 6 weeks. The German people have welcomed the refugees in all good faith, but people are now waking up to the fact that their culture has been permanently altered. Crime is on the increase, and in the western side of Germany, where I go, racism is also on the increase. Buildings that are converted for refugee habitation are routinely burnt to the ground, usually the night before they're due to open. This is never reported on our news. Angela Merkel has broken Germany, in my opinion. Communities are broken. Well, let's listen to what he has to say about the wider issues faced by German society. And I'm very interested to hear your opinions. If we just focus on the attitudes of women, or attitudes towards women rather, which is very, very topical. Do you think it's acceptable to make refugee men attend lessons on how to treat women? 03459 455 555. Before I take your calls, let's hear from Tom Wilson. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Good morning. So how often do you go over to Germany then, Tom?
I've been over 4 times this year.
Right. So you see, and this is a regular thing, is it, for the last few years you've been going over?
Yeah, the last 3 years, yeah. I go sort of every 4 to 6 weeks.
And how long do you stay?
Last time was 10 days. So 10 days to 2 weeks every time.
Okay. And what have you noticed over the last couple of years, since Germany in particular opened its borders and was very welcoming to refugees?
On the eastern side, is where I go, rather than the western side, there is more sort of hatred, I think, now than there was. Sort of racism, if you like, in a small form. That never existed before. On the western side, they're still very accepting and very forgiving. My brother works and lives on the western side of Germany, and he thinks that they haven't actually quite woken up yet and realised what's happening.
What is happening? I mean, why are people on the eastern side, for example, feeling racist towards these people?
It's because I think it's something we've experienced over many, many, many years here. We got multiculturalism in this country, haven't we? And it's evolved over a long period of time. There, it's arrived on the doorstep within months, within a year. You now have people walking up and down the streets that are unemployed. They're obviously a different skin colour. They walk around in groups. And, it's just not... It's hard to explain.
So did it used to be quite a kind of non-immigrant white place then, Eastern Germany?
Yeah, I mean, you had very small enclaves. The most of the migrants in Germany were always Turkish people. There was a lot of Turks in Germany for many years, and they had their own little places where they lived. Even now in Leipzig, where I go, they're still in one area, part of Leipzig, and so that people knew that. They called it small Istanbul, actually, where they lived, sort of. But outside of that area, it's predominantly white, or it was white, and it was German people and white people, if you like, and now it's sort of noticeable that people of a different colour and race and religion are now, occupying the streets. I think it's just a shot to the system. I think, multiculturalism, I think, is something that Merkel wants to introduce. And I think you hit it on the head earlier on with the lady you were speaking to, that these people are now paying the pensions, aren't they, the pension pot. Somebody's got to pay the pensions. So people are living longer in Germany. I think Merkel's realised this, and that you're getting this older generation, and now they need somebody to go and pay this pension.
Yes,
pot.
I think from what I have read, politically, that is behind a large part of her political motivation to welcome in lots of refugees, because Germany, unlike the UK, has not had the kind of migration levels that we've seen in recent years. Everybody is living longer. People in Britain are living longer. People in Germany are living longer as well. Now, if people live longer, it means that they have to be paid their pension for longer, which means that it costs the country more money. That's the financial facts to it. Now, if people are going to live longer, you've got to have more young people working and paying tax in order to pay all of these extra pensions. So I think Angela Merkel, absolutely part of her political desire to welcome these refugees in is that she's hoping if they can come to Germany, if we can integrate them in the country, if they get jobs, if they pay their taxes, then as a country we will then get more money coming in. But something interesting you just said. You said a lot of them are walking around unemployed. Why have they not got jobs?
Well, because they are refugees. They came in. I mean, around about 1 million came in, and they just don't walk into jobs. They were just invited in to get away to a safe place, a safe haven from where they were. And
right.
So
do you feel as if there's not been enough of a plan to, once they have arrived in Germany, to deal with them?
No, I don't think there was any plan. I mean, they just said, the doors are open, please come in, and there was no plan. They just arrived, didn't they? 1 million in sort of one go almost.
And you can understand why, if you've been used to living in a small German town or village, you know everyone, everybody is German or everybody is white, and all of a sudden, within a matter of weeks or months, you've got thousands and thousands of people who don't speak a word of German, don't have anywhere to live, maybe have a different skin colour. You can understand why, to some people, that will be quite overwhelming, quite a shock, and they will feel as if their local neighbourhood, their local community has changed in a very short space of time.
Yeah, on the western side where my brother lives, they're getting on with it. He's a bus driver as well.
But is it more multicultural on the western side of Germany?
No, they just seem to be more accepting of it than the east side. The east side, I said to your researcher, the eastern side is still a poorer part of Germany, the poorer neighbour, if you like, of the whole country. And I think the poorer people feel more offended than the people in the west, where they're affluent and it doesn't really affect them, if you know what I mean.
So do you see any of these refugees that have arrived in Germany actually, apart from walking about and being unemployed, and I'm sure everybody, including everybody in Germany, would much rather, if they're going to be there, they're doing jobs and they're contributing. But are they actually doing anything wrong?
No, they're not doing anything wrong. People say crime is on the increase. I can't substantiate that. Are they doing anything wrong? Not really, but it's that thing you said earlier on, that are they fitting in? And perhaps, no, they're not quite fitting in. With the women thing you were on about earlier on, there's no real complaints from the women over there that they're being got at by anybody. So I don't see that as a problem.
Really? So that's being exaggerated, do you think?
I think so. Yeah, there was one or two isolated cases, I think, and that was at New Year's Eve, wasn't it? And in the big cities.
Well, yeah, pretty extreme, horrible cases.
Yeah, but I think, generally...
But it's interesting that that's your perception, because on Friday, I spoke to a lady, I don't know if you remember her.
Yeah.
And she was very, very, very passionate about the fact that many of these refugees come from parts of the world where attitudes towards women are totally at odds with our attitudes here in the West. And you can't change their mind overnight. So they're arriving in a country like Germany. They have attitudes towards women that we would find unacceptable here in Europe. And there's no plan to kind of deal with those different attitudes.
No, not at all, not at the moment. But it'll have to come in time, won't it?
But from what you're saying, it's not really a great problem.
The women issue or the immigrant...
The women issue.
The women issue, I don't perceive it as a problem. I mean, I know lots of women out there, and nobody's actually ever complained or said anything, or that they've been looked at or touched, or it's sort of felt threatened in any way or form. So
is it just, do you think it's scaremongering, this idea? I mean, for example, I gather there have been posters put up in swimming pools informing men of how to behave.
I've heard this as well. I've not seen that myself, but then I haven't been to the pool out there, so I don't know. But that is a possibility. That's something the Germans would do in order to bring
what is the sense towards Angela Merkel? Because Angela Merkel recently has just said that there will be no change in policy. The Germans are not going to suddenly stop allowing refugees in. They're going to continue to welcome them, although she has suggested that they will check them a little more thoroughly to make sure that you don't get any rogue IS fighters managing to camouflage themselves in and amongst the genuine refugees.
On the eastern side, I would say she has no chance of getting back in again. On the western side, she still has a chance. They still see her as a good leader. On the eastern side, she's still respected as a good leader, but this is an almighty faux pas by her, according to the people in the east.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, there was. I don't know where it is exactly. It was on the west side. There was a small village of 100 people, and they built a refugee camp of 1,000 there. And, that to say that they upset the local culture is an understatement, isn't it, when that ratio is there.
But the thing is, these refugees that have arrived, let's ignore the ones that we would all want to stop coming to the United Kingdom or to Germany or to anyone. The IS fighters who want to try and get here to cause harm. Nobody wants them. Everybody would far rather they just stayed in Raqqa and blew themselves up rather than anyone else. But these other people, they're genuine refugees. They're people whose homes have been destroyed, whose families have been wiped out. They need somebody to show them a hand of friendship, don't they?
Yeah, I suppose they do, but I don't know. You put them in a difficult position, really, because you don't want to appear to come out to be sort of racist or anything like that. No, it's very hard to answer. Yeah, they do need somewhere to go, but I don't know. They need integrating then, I suppose. They need education.
Yeah, it sounds to me as if there wasn't enough, as so often is the case with politicians. They have these ideas, they identify something that needs to be fixed. They put in place the policy in order to fix it, and in this case, Angela Merkel obviously saw that as the financial security of Germany, paying for an increasingly ageing population. But what she didn't do, based on what you're saying, is think it through. She didn't think about how, when all of these people suddenly arrive in a German town or village, how do you help them to settle? But also, how do you send a very clear message out to the people that already live in that German town or village that these people are here to be an asset to the country rather than to change the face of the country forevermore and for people to feel hostile towards them?
Yeah, it is education now, isn't it? It's down to education now, and it's a long, hard road, I think. My brother, they drives a bus on the Mosel, on the western side of Germany, and they're just villages in the Weinbergs there, in the vineyards, and they get on the bus, and as you say, their attitudes are different. They get on this bus and they just walk past. And he says, "Well, hold up, you've got to pay." And they say, "Well, no, Angela Merkel invited us in, and we've come all this way without paying, so we're not likely to pay on the bus either." And then he throws them off, but now he's been told he can't throw them off either. He's got to carry them. And, things like that, I suppose, cause resentment, don't they?
Of course they do. Of course they do. And it's unacceptable and disappointing to hear that a refugee would have that kind of attitude. You would imagine, and I've spoken to refugees who came to this country, for example, during the Second World War, or the descendants of those refugees, and they're only one thing, and that's grateful. They would never, ever want to turn round to the host nation and slap people around the face.
No, I'm sure there must be an awful lot of refugees who are grateful. And
I'm sure.
We only see the people that aren't grateful, or they're people who stick in our minds.
Exactly. Well, that kind of story that you've just told about the bus, that's something that people will now remember. But of course, as you say, there are probably an awful lot of people who have come to Germany who kiss the ground every day because they're just so grateful that they have somewhere safe to bring their children up without fear of everybody being blown to pieces. Tom, thank you very much indeed for your time. Very interesting speaking to you. Let's get some more reaction to this from Amma Wakaf, who's a British-Syrian businessman living in Milton Keynes. Good morning to you, Amma.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, I mean, in many ways, you are a Syrian migrant here. All of these Syrian migrants that are in Germany, as we've heard, there are some issues. The culture is different. The sheer numbers of people that have arrived in Germany in one go is huge. Can you understand why some German people feel very put out by the situation they find themselves in now?
Well, of course I do. It's probably the sheer numbers. I mean, we've had that in Syria when the 2003 Iraqi war broke out, and we've had suddenly like 2 million people jumping into our laps. And that was like 10% of the population increase, and you could imagine the repercussions, economic, social, and so on and so forth. And these are Arabs like us, and Iraqis are pretty much similar to Syrians, but still there was a lot of tension. They're taking our jobs, they're taking our flats, houses, and so on and so forth. There was a lot of pressure on infrastructure, education, health, you name it. So the sheer number is definitely what makes people, a bit reluctant to deal with this in a positive way. The ratio of bad people, so to speak, to put it in a black or white sort of framework, is no larger than anywhere else in the world, including Britain or Germany or whatever. But you just start to see those people, because they're different. Going back to the bus, non-paying.
Yeah, I'm not going to pay for your bus because Angela Merkel invited me here.
Yes, I mean I've seen there was a video circulating for a refugee young lady in Holland, and she was complaining that there was only one channel on television or so, whatever it was, and it was only like not many variety of food that was offered to them, and she was fiercely complaining that this is not acceptable and I should go back to Syria or whatever it is. And this, absurd it might look, but actually it gives away a little bit of who those people are. Many of those people who came to Europe, to Germany in particular, are people who are aspiring.
Oh dear. What a shame. We just seem to have lost Emma at that crucial moment. We'll see if we can get him back, because I'm very interested to hear what he has to say. We're getting back after the news. We're talking about the situation in Germany with the refugees and potential cultural differences between those people that have fled from war-torn countries like Syria, for example, and who've been given refuge in Germany, and whether that needs to be dealt with. One Labour MP in this country has suggested that maybe we need to have a national education programme that's specifically targeted at attitudes towards women, because many of these refugees are coming from countries where they have very different attitudes towards women. Well, I was just in the middle of a very interesting conversation with Ammar Wakaf, who is a British Syrian businessman who lives in Milton Keynes, when sadly he was cut off. Ammar, good morning to you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, good morning to you.
Don't take it personally. Now, you were just saying, and it was fascinating, you were saying that there are people who are complaining in Germany, people who, for example, refugees who've come over and say, well, I don't really like this, I don't like the food you're expecting us to eat. And you said that's not altogether surprising, but then we lost you just before you explained why it wasn't surprising.
Yes, this particular case, this particular video was actually on Dutch national television, so this was in Holland, Netherlands. Now, that is not surprising in a sense, because we tend to think about these people as refugees who are running away from barrel bombs and trying to make safe, with their lives and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we need to understand that many of them, in fact, the vast majority, are people who are looking for a better life. So they are, in a sense, immigrants rather than refugees. I would argue that if you leave Syria, for example, running away from all the battles and carnage that is taking place, and go to Jordan, for example, or Turkey, Lebanon, neighboring countries, you're in a refugee camp, that's a refugee, I would accept that. But once you make the decision to leave that place, like Turkey, and you may not be living in a refugee camp in Turkey, for example, you might be living in a city in Turkey, take the route to Europe, to Germany, then you're looking for a better chance, and especially for your children. Many of those people came especially to Germany because they thought, well, we are welcomed here, we have enough skills, and we can make a better life for our children. Many of them came, for example, from government-controlled areas where there isn't much carnage taking place.
How do you know that?
Well, I have quite a few friends who know quite a few friends, so we know all these people. I've had this one incident of a friend who left Abu Dhabi. They were on a very good salary, but Abu Dhabi or the Gulf in general, they don't give you passports, and they thought, well, if Germany is open, let's go there. They worked in the oil and gas business, and they went for Germany to secure passports for their children because there was not sufficient stability in their mind about the future of Syria. So people, I wouldn't say they're opportunistic, but I made the journey 12 years ago here to improve my life, have a better education, broaden my horizon, and I wouldn't deny anyone the right to do so. Now, the bad people that we see, they are there, they are amongst us, and they're cloning themselves, obviously. And it is inevitable that with a sheer number that is flocking in a country like Germany, you would have that percentage even exaggerated. Why? Because of the negative, naturally occurring, I have to add, negative attitude of the local population. Now, that would put immediately a lot of immigrants who would feel alienated anyway, because of language barriers, because of all sorts of things, they would immediately put them on the defense.
So are you saying then that ultimately you do not believe in the long term the addition of all those people into Germany from the likes of Syria will work out for Germany? It will backfire on them?
I think it would. I think it would work, because I've heard this, and I've listened to your previous guest. I've heard this narrative about, or discussion about, the pensions in Germany, and that old people are growing old, and who's going to pay for them. In fact, one of my colleagues at the business school here, he is a German, and he was arguing that he doesn't want to work to feed, to pay the pension for like 10 old people. So that was, and this was like 10 years ago, pretty much before this conflict. So there is a bit of a market, to put it in business terms, for bringing in labour and so on. But
yes, you do. And can I just read, I want to read a text that's come in, because I think a lot of people, they misunderstand how the system works. Steve of Aylesbury says, JVS, please stop talking about immigrants paying our pensions. I'm not quite retired, just a few years to go. However, during my 46 years of working to date, I've been paying the Treasury my contributions, which take on the fact that I may, if I'm alive, need to have a pension when I'm too old to work. I've paid for it, not some economic migrants who, when they've had enough money in their bank accounts, go back home, will leave and enjoy their lives with money taken out of our economy. I mean, the fact is, the system doesn't work like that. I, as a working person now, I pay my tax every month. My tax is taken out of my salary. That is not going into a big pot waiting for me to get to 65 or 67 or however old I have to be before I can retire. It's not going into that. It's going to pay people's pensions now. Exactly. The same thing works in Germany. People who are working now, they're not paying for their own future, they're paying for pensioners now. So what I need when I retire is I need enough working people in this country paying money in to afford to pay my pension. Germany has exactly the same issue, except I understand in Germany they have a greater problem in terms of they've got lots and lots and lots of older people who are retiring, but not enough young people who are prepared to take the jobs.
Brilliant. And let me quote also Ed Balls, if you remember him. He said a couple of years back, I remember watching him on television saying, this pension thing is the biggest scam in history. It's money in, money out. Nobody is paying towards their own pension. It's money in, money out. Now, going back to Germany, I think they made that decision of opening doors in the same state or frame of mind that the Labour government did when they opened the doors in 2003 and 2004 here for the Eastern Europeans. They probably thought that they would end up with 20 or 30,000 immigrants max, but they obviously ended up with like 100 times that figure.
But that was obvious. I mean, that was a stupid miscalculation, if that was what they were thinking, because when you're dealing with people who, I mean, you've only got to look at the news of Syria and see entire towns completely destroyed, just rubble on the floor, to know that all those people are looking to go somewhere.
It is opportunistic in a sense, but at the end of the day, going back to the discussion, the people need, from an immigrant's point of view, I could give you my own impression and my own experience. Actually, when I came here in 2004 to do the business study that I needed to do, our previous predecessors in the business school prepared us a booklet that we read well before arriving into England, telling us about the localities, what to expect, how...
what about attitudes towards women?
Well, I don't think... I think we're pushing it a little bit too much when we talk specifically about women. I think both men and women coming from overseas should learn a little bit more about the expectations of the society they're coming into about individual rights and so on and so forth, I wouldn't. Yes, there would be people whose societies are originally a bit more patriarchal than the societies here in Britain, and they would have a little bit more expectations of women. If they see a man and a woman kissing in the street, they probably, at the first sight, they've never seen that in Syria or Saudi Arabia or whatever, Afghanistan, they might think this woman is a prostitute and she's up for grabs and so on and so forth. So there would be a sort of need to tell those people, in a sense, what would be expected in a society. But that's an awareness-raising sort of exercise.
Well, that's like any of us, isn't it? When we go to another culture,
exactly.
There's lots. I remember once landing at Sri Lanka airport and waiting to catch a connecting flight, and all the men were sitting there holding hands with one another, and with their hands on one another's legs.
Yeah,
The entire airport, there were hardly any women in the entire airport, and they were all holding hands. And I sat there thinking, this is the most peculiar. What on earth is all this about? And of course, it's not until you actually then look into the culture and you recognise that it's a complete different culture that you then understand it. But that's all well and good if you're dealing with educated people. So someone like you, for example, coming as a migrant to the United Kingdom, you're clearly educated, you're able to read up, to inform yourself, and to accept that you're going to a different country, they have a different culture, and you have to accept that. But how do you deal with someone who maybe is coming from the likes of Syria, but is not as fortunate as you, has not been given the kind of education, but still needs somewhere to live?
I would accept the notion that I was thoroughly vetted before arriving in this place. I went through a lot of process to come, to present my papers, both to the university and to the embassy and so on and so forth. So I do accept that I was vetted, and there are a lot of people who won't be vetted if they arrive at Germany or France or whatever. But I wouldn't underestimate their intelligence, in a sense, and say they won't be able to learn. All that is need to it is to probably allow them, the likes of how to drive, for example, and we probably need to let, the French learn how to drive in England as well, let alone the Syrians. But at the end of the day, how to respect people standing in a queue or whatever, all those sorts of things need to be raised so that people are made aware that there are certain expectations in the host community they're coming into. But I would like to touch on a point that was made earlier by your guest.
Very briefly, if you would, Emma, because I want to speak to Liz Needham.
Yeah, multiculturalism has evolved in this country, and I totally agree. And I would like here to look on a positive note of this society here. Let us think of how many terrorist attacks that has taken place in Paris and France in general in the last few weeks. And months, of course. The vast majority of them were second-generation people. And this, in a sense, could happen in England as well. But the fact of the matter is, apparently, and I've discovered this after coming into England, that the society there is probably more hostile towards immigrants than the society here. And this gives you a bit of defensiveness. No, I can prove myself. I have a friend in France who had to change his name from Mohammed to Michel in order to not to get, or his CV not to get frowned upon when he applies for a job. Now, that doesn't exist in England or Britain, to be more specific, and that is a good thing. And the last thing we need is to start treating people as aliens and start to get defensive on them. Because if we do, then all what we would be doing is to increase the percentage of people from whom we would get trouble.
Amma, thank you very much. Very interesting hearing things from your perspective. Amma Wakaf is a British Syrian businessman who lives in Milton Keynes. Well, Amma mentioned the host community. Well, let's speak to someone who wants her host community to host refugees. Good morning to you, Liz Needham, who is from the founder of the group St Albans for Refugees. Hello, Liz.
Good morning.
Good morning. Do you accept that people coming from other countries, whether it's Syria or Afghanistan, they're going to come with a different culture, and it's very important to make sure that they understand the culture they're moving to and understand what is required from them?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is no doubt that they're coming from different cultures, and there's all sorts of different things that happen. Your last caller was very interesting and also very informed on the subject. I was speaking to a Syrian lady recently who said that when she moved over here, she's a bit like him. She's been here for a while. But she was saying when she came over here first, her biggest problem was that people would wave at her while she was driving on the road, from other cars or flashlights to let her through or whatever. And she'd never seen that happen before, and she was completely confused because in a lot of Middle Eastern countries, that's just not something that people do. So she had to learn, the rules of the road almost all over again. And she spoke of other cultural differences that are like that. I think there is a lot to be said for teaching about different cultural differences, but not in the way that the MP you've been speaking about wants to do it. I think you've got to do it as an overall thing, which is teaching cultural differences in general rather than specifically targeting men and saying you need to learn about how to treat women. Most of the refugees that I have met, both abroad and here in the UK that have already settled here, all know exactly how to treat women equally and have no problem with it whatsoever. But I do think that actually having a sort of personal, social and health education the way you get in school is probably no harm, but on all subjects rather than on the specific subject of how to behave with women, because you're immediately separating them out and almost implying that they are sexual predators just by virtue of being refugees, and that is not the case.
The thing is, though, there are some kind of cultural ideals that we all have, and I'm sure us Brits have many things that are just ingrained in us because we've grown up in this country, we've been educated in this country, we're used to life in this country. And if we were to go to another country where they do things totally differently, somebody could tell you about it, but it's not going to change the way you feel inside, is it?
But I think you're assuming that most people who come to this country don't actually want to integrate. I mean, you are almost implying that every man who comes here, every refugee man who comes here is by virtue of being a refugee a sexual predator, and that is not the case.
Not at all.
Well, but that is the implication. If you are actually specifically taking refugee men to teach them about how to behave around women, that is almost the implication. I'm not suggesting that we don't need to have this personal health and social education, but not simply on that subject.
Good to talk to you, Liz. Thank you very much indeed. Liz Needham is the founder of the group St Albans for Refugees. Pat in Hitchin says, if it prevents just one woman being raped or abused, then the lessons will be worth it. Thank you, Pat.